No, thank you. Thank you so much, Alexandra. I had the good opportunity to read a little bit about you, and this is fantastic what you've been doing. I saw all the other great people you've had conversations with earlier, or you plan to in the future. This is fascinating what you're doing, and I'm glad that after your entrepreneurial stint, while you continue them, I'm glad you're taking out some or eking out some time for this. I'm glad you're doing this, and I hope this reaches far and wide.
Thank you. I'm hoping it reaches 1.5 billion. I call them earballs. So that's my intention. But thank you. All right. So we're going to start. Hello universe. A little less than a year ago, I happened to be in Dallas. I was in my Uber and staring out the window daydreaming. And all of a sudden, something jolted me out of my trance. I saw this hotel with big red letters and the name Oyo. I was intrigued by the name, and a little part of me thought maybe a letter was missing or something. So I Googled it on my phone on the way to my meeting, and I was floored by what I uncovered. A college dropout from Odisha, India, creates a startup at age 19, and just 7 years later goes on to create billions of dollars worth of value, 10 billion to be exact. Today, I'm chatting with Ritesh Agarwal, the 26-year-old founder and CEO of Oyo Rooms and Homes. Hi, Ritesh.
Hey, Alexandra. Thank you so much for having me over, and thank you for sharing this fascinating story. I'm glad you did search about a company that has gotten us to talk to each other today. So I'm glad.
Well, obviously, I have to know, how'd you come up with the name Oyo? What does it mean?
Back in the day, in India, to travel was not really an independent experience, right? So people had to rely on the relatives, on friends, on people they know. Frankly, when I was growing up, travel used to be almost only about pilgrim destinations. And people would say, hey, your mamaji's brother or your uncle's sister, she lives in that little town. So why don't you go live there? So it always felt to me, why can't travel be independent? That is why I felt people should be independent when they travel, and hence Oyo meant on your own. That is, you can make decisions on your own without being reliant on other people for your travels. So that's the very innocent purpose behind our company, which I don't know whether it makes sense globally in 80 countries where we operate, but that's how we started.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely didn't. Well, I think that's almost a great place to start this conversation because while you came to this idea on your own, you certainly didn't build this empire on your own. So I really want to paint a picture for my audience right now. So Oyo has 100,000 partners who just received close to 4 billion in their bank accounts. There are 43,000 hotels, 150,000 vacation homes, 41 million guests across 80 countries worldwide. The Oyo app has had over 50 million downloads. Oyo is valued at $10 billion. Dollars. It's backed by SoftBank, Sequoia, Lightspeed, other heavyweights. I mean, it's incredible what you've been able to accomplish, and to think that you started this whole quest when you were sort of 17 is crazy to me in general. But, growing up here in the US, and so I'm Guju girl at heart, and I grew up in the Midwest for those that kind of know the US. While I didn't grow up in the hospitality business, it is a little near and dear to my heart because so many Gujus are motel owners. In fact, I think it's like 50% of all motels in the US are owned by Gujus, which is incredible to me. And one of my girlfriends who I grew up with, her family was in the motel business. And if we wanted to go to the mall as teenagers, I'd always have to wait for her to finish the housekeeping in her hotel. Maybe she'd be checking in some customers. My parents love to tell the story of how when they came to the US in the late 70s, they took this road trip from like Houston, Texas to Florida. They wanted to go to Disney World. So they had to stop one night, and they stop at this motel late at night. They're super new to this country, my parents. And the guy who checks them in is a Gujarati. I think everyone apparently lost their mind. The guy wakes up his wife, makes a full-fledged guju meal and chai. And the next morning when my parents leave, they pack my parents a tiffin. And like my mom said, it was like leaving relatives. And that is how I think the fabric of I think Indian Americans in the US sort of built community. And what I think they sort of all have in common is that many of them were independent mom and pop owners of these hotels, right? They would, like I said, like my girlfriend, her parents would run it, the cleaning, the budgeting, the figuring out the pricing. And it was really prime for disruption. And that's really where you come in, Ritesh. I mean, what you've created at Oyo Rooms and Homes is so smart and clever, because for these independent motel owners now that have lots of inefficiencies, they weren't really benefiting from data science or anything like that. And Oyo comes in, provides them for a fee, of course, but provides them branding, standardization, utilizing technology, optimizing their business in general. I mean, it's like this out of the box amazingness tool to supercharge your business, yet they get to keep 100% ownership of their motel. So first of all, did I explain that right, Ritesh?
Absolutely. I'm amazed. I'm amazed that this is probably the first time we're talking, and you know so much about our aspiration and what we are trying to do. I think specifically in the United States, it was an absolute surprise for us that so many hotel owners were actually of Indian origin. And of course, specifically Gujaratis. And if I were to sort of go deeper in those, few villages around Surat, we actually hosted last year our US owners for a retreat in Gujarat during the New Year's, because
Wow.
a lot of them end up coming into India for the New Year's or probably the holiday season around then. When we went and met a lot of these hotel owners, we learned about problems that we should solve and problems that we probably should not solve, because those are problems that are not encountered by individual asset owners in the United States. But we were always treated like family. I have been to asset owners who have taken me to their houses, to the God's place in their houses, in the artis that they have at home, invited me for dinners, to the, of course, Swaminathan temples in multiple
Yes.
cities. It's been incredible. I went to the Houston temple of Sri Swaminathan. And what an
It's
incredible temple that is.
incredible. Yeah.
So people have made us truly members of the family in the United States, and I've been very thankful. So it's been a very pleasant surprise that a substantial part of the United States hotels, motels are owned and operated by Indian origin, Indian Gujarati origin hotel owners.
Yeah. And I mean, 80 countries, Ritesh, that's insane. But we got to take this story back, people. Let's start. Let's start. I think it's age 17. Like, how do you get this idea? Let's start there.
Sure. Look, I think at 17, I was trying to do something similar, but not this same business. I was trying to begin like a reservation website for accommodations, because I found that there are so many of these little accommodations that don't receive enough bookings. But in a couple of, like in a year and a half, what I figured was that the problem statement was not just being able to find places to book. There are actually many websites you can book places on. However, there are very few companies who go and work truly as a friend and a partner of the small hotel or the small homeowner and say, well, I can help you fix prices. Well, I can help you manage your consumer database. Well, I can manage your accounting and accounting systems. I can help manage your consumer CRM systems, a lot of which were frankly not thought about, because back in the day, even in the US, majority of the people who travel to hotels or motels just drive in. But that's changing. Consumers are increasingly trying to make reservations online. They look at the brand, they look at the quality, they read the ratings and the reviews. They're very savvy. They're looking at more loyalty points. They want to decide which hotel they should go to depending on the next rewards that they're going to receive. I think we were in a very sweet spot to be able to come to asset owners and say that this new change is going to happen and we could potentially be your partners in change. So the first hotel, let me try, sorry, instead of giving you big, exciting things. Let me try and come to the details. So I spent around 300 days every day, sorry, not 300 days, 3 months and 100 days every day staying with one of these guest house owners, hotel owners, and so on in India. And one of those owners that I got to meet was Mr. Rajesh Yadav. Mr. Yadav owned a hotel in Gurgaon, which is in a satellite of New Delhi NCR region. I think his occupancy was 19% for a couple of years. So my proposal to Mr. Yadav was, if you consider taking advantage of all the systems I want to build, this 19% could be 35 or 40%. And he looked at me and said, look, I like you, Ritesh. I'm going to do this, but I can tell you that ain't happening. But I'll still do it because my occupancy can't go below 19%. So whether it goes to 35 or not doesn't matter because it's already doing very poorly. So I said, fair enough, fair deal. He joins our family, and in the first month, occupancy rises. And I just want to know want to share for our listeners, that's not the expectation I'm setting for our every hotel owner. The first hotel went from 19% to 90% occupancy in the first month itself.
That's incredible.
So you'd ask, what would you do when you're starting your first hotel? You have no resources, you have no brand that people know about. How do you get this occupancy rise? So we did just three things. And when I say we, it is me, Anuj, and a couple of interns. We did the first thing. We looked at pictures of various hotels in the city which were ranked above on online websites, and we looked at what interiors of them, we could potentially replicate in our hotel. So we did warm white light, white linen, single striped satin, some runners and cushions, all the basic things. The cost was probably like $100 or so a room, but it really got us a reasonably good quality of experience that we were able to put together. Combine that with dynamic pricing. We did not keep a flat pricing. We enabled dynamic pricing with the demand that came in through the day, which meant that earlier the hotel had a flat pricing saying that it should not be very low, but it should not be very high. We actually started the prices low, tried to break even with a 30-40% occupancy with that. Once we had so many customers coming, the hotel was popular on the booking pages. Because it was popular, people were willing to pay slightly higher prices. And the third thing that we did was tried and ensured that everybody in the hotel knew there is one thing that mattered: guest service quality and ratings. If you get your ratings right, consumers will tell other people to come stay in the same hotel, and hence you'll be able to price better, your rankings will be better, and so on. All the basics. But these basics could substantially change the world of the hotel owner because they did not have the capability or the resources to get the photography understanding of 500 other hotels and figure out which one they needed to do, and then figure out the logistics and the value chain to execute on that. They did not have the resources for dynamic pricing. They did not have the resources of understanding what it took to improve ratings. All of that know-how is what we brought in and helped the hotel improve. So I know it sounds a little bit weak, complicated. It's actually very simple.
But it wasn't Oyo yet. That's just like you're basically going around. You're 17 at this point. You spend 3 months, your summer break, I'm assuming, is that right? And then you're sleeping at 100 different budget motels, I guess. And were you going in with the intention that you're doing market research, or were you just traveling and then this came up?
So look, I think yes, this was in the 6 months that is there between high school and university, right? Because in India,
Okay.
typically the schools finish around March and universities begin at fall. So you have a bunch of months in between. So I actually believe that for a lot of young entrepreneurs, I highly recommend that's the sweet spot of starting up, because that's not really summer vacations. I don't know about Indian Americans, but back here in India, if you're in your 11th grade and you're graduating to 12th, in the summer vacations your parents would want you to study even then about the next class and next grade. But when you're between high school and university, you frankly don't have a lot going on. So that's around the time that I started the business, and there was no real intention of market research, but I did believe that there was a challenge. And what I was telling a lot of these homeowners or hotel owners when I was reaching out to them saying, I want to come stay at your place, they say that I genuinely believe there's a big challenge here. I want to come see you, learn from you, and who knows, I'd be able to make something out of it. So that's a little background about what it was back then.
So then you find out about the Theo Fellowship. So how did you find out about that?
Well, that's a fascinating story. I don't know if you'd even believe that. I was watching this movie called The Social Network,
Yes.
and in that I see, this person writing the first check for Facebook. So I think to myself, how amazing would it be if I ever get the opportunity to meet this guy? He seems to be incredible. So I go to the nearby cyber cafe, which is a thing, right? Which is because you did not have internet at the place I was living in at that point of time. I'd go to like a nearby store where people could use the internet and so on. And I find about him, and then I see about the TL Fellowship, and then I reach out to a few of my friends, and they've heard about it as well. So I feel like, well, we're going to do this. And it had fascinating questions, right? Alexandra, questions like, what would you do if, capital was not a problem? How would you change the world? Questions that you'd never be asked as a high school kid, right? So I was fascinated by that. By then, actually, there were, of course, a lot of successful Indian Americans who were a part of the TL Fellowship, but there was no other Indian or Asian resident who had become a fellow. So I thought, no chance I become a fellow, but I'll still apply because the questions are great. So I kept applying. I actually missed the deadline to apply
Wow.
because the deadline was 12 of the night or something. And funnily, I felt it was game over. I'd never be able to make up for filling the documents. Interestingly, and I wake up next morning and I'm like, gosh, I was trying to fill up the form. How did I crash out? And turns out time zone helped me make sure that I still got a few hours to fill the form. So I just got in at the last moment. There were a bunch of interviews. I got invited to come to the finalist session. I actually came just because I thought free trip to the US. I would do that. Like I felt I'd never get to travel to the US after that. So I felt I'd go to the US just for this, but I was very lucky. I became a TL fellow, and then of course, Oyo's also done relatively better over time.
Yeah, I had read. So one of the people that I have had on the show is the astronaut Sunitha Williams, and she was talking about how the first time she, got in her spaceship, literally looked back and saw planet Earth, and I think. If anyone hasn't heard that interview, you should, because you can feel the awe and wonder that we all expect we would feel by that experience. But her own dad sort of came on a spaceship of his own on a boat to America, to new lands. And that's how their family sort of settled here. And so when I read your story about the first time you used your passport was to come to basically Palo Alto in my neighborhood, I was so excited to hear that. What was that like? I mean, did you live in a startup house? Like, was it like the startup, the movie Social Network? Was that your expectation?
Frankly, my expectation, look, for me, it was quite a culture shock. I went from a little town in Orissa, all the way to New Delhi. That was already most of the culture shock I could have had. And then I suddenly come into San Francisco. It was first the city. And the first day I come, I distinctly remember they wanted to engage all the fellows. So we actually had a treasure hunt all
Oh,
across the
I
city,
love
walking
that.
around the city. We won. But
Yay! You made us proud.
it was beautiful. I got a tram, I think, as an award.
Yeah, the
I
little
still think
trolley.
it. Yes, yes. So for me, I think all I thought was, these people around myself, they look and feel like me. I have
Yeah.
never seen people like these. So I was fascinated by all the other finalists. So I make it to the TL Fellowship, and then few of us live at what we call as a hacker house.
Yep.
We lived at Millbrae, which is great because houses are not expensive, and you can get BART and Caltrain both, which is great, right? Like Why would you not want it? Live in the suburbs, but still get both Caltrain and Board. So that's what was our early days. We were a bunch of fellows living in at home, and each one of those fellows are doing incredible things. I'm very inspired by them. They're truly like my if I were at university. These were the people who I would have liked to be my university friends. So I'm glad that I ran into them.
I think everyone's heard the science behind how you're the average of the 5 people you're around. So I truly believe, that it's so important how your mind is getting filled up, right? Naveen Jain, a billionaire we had on the show, said that it's easier to do big things than to do smaller things, which I could not agree with more. And but talking about being around good people, I think part of the reason so many South Asian families value education and a good academic path is because they hope you're around good people, right? And how did your mom and dad feel when you said that? I mean, by the way, for those that don't know, part of the shtick of the Thiel Fellowship is that you basically drop out of school. You pause, right? So how did your very nice Indian family feel about this when you said you're going to drop out of college?
Well, we didn't discuss that. Uh,
Okay.
you know, I don't recommend it for all our listeners. I think I was naive back then. Here's the thing, right? I felt I would not make it to the fellowship. So
Yeah.
I told my parents, I'm going to the US. There are these very nice people who are paying for my trip. Why? What's the trouble? They said, okay, that's fine. If you're traveling there just for some person is paying for the trip, that's okay. And then as soon as I become a TL fellow, they actually put it out on the press. So the Indian press starts covering it in local languages. So my parents read that. I'm still in California. They call me and they're like, Ritesh, this newspapers say that you've won some fellowship, and there's apparently, this is a matter of great prestige and so on. I was like, yes, speaking of that, I'm not going to go to university after this. And that's how it broke to them. So they weren't very excited about it to begin with. Funnily, a couple of times, my mother, I don't know if you know, in Indian Americans in the US may not relate with it, but my mother told me a couple of times, after that, a couple of years saying, do you not want to do just physical university? Can you do correspondence? Because in India, a lot of people get like the correspondence degree. And I had to tell her that I am barred, like I have promised to stop out of university for 2 years. I can't be doing this. So one of these years, I think 3 or 4 years back, the Prime Minister of India was on a very important event. And he says, whenever I listen to Ritesh, it feels like, why did a tea seller not want to be a hotel chain owner? And this was on live television, and my parents were watching. So that's the day my mom sent a message saying, I think it's okay for you not to go to your university.
It
But
took
until
that
then,
moment. It took that moment. Well, as a
so
mother myself, I can kind of relate. Although I have to say, I'm kind of encouraging my son to really, I'd like to think, put this entrepreneurial spirit into him. I think in my family, we really value that free spirit and independent thinking that I think you had inherently within you. And I think that it's so interesting. Like now looking back, do you have any advice for kids literally who are in high school, who have watched The Social Network, who too want to sort of chase that dream and drop out of school? Like, do you recommend it? I mean, what do you think looking back?
So I think in our tier fellowship, the contract or the paper document that we sort of look at, the first page would say something fascinating, right? It would say, I think Mark Twain's quotes, which is, we never let university interfere with education. So I believe education is extremely critical.
Yeah,
The only thing is, education doesn't need to come from the pre-established framework of universities. They could come from, frankly, anywhere. I got the
exactly.
opportunity to get education from this fascinating other fellows from the ground, from my visits to a lot of these hotels and guest houses by building my own business. People could get this education from probably universities or anything else. So my view is that I would encourage education and the pursuit of excellence for that. Now, whatever you feel brings you that excellence in education, I'd believe by all means.
Yeah. I think that's so spot on. It's about being curious and constantly learning. And speaking of learning, I'm sure you get asked all the time, like, what have you learned? But you know what I'm actually interested in? What did you have to unlearn in order to kind of become a disruptive, supersonic startup founder?
I think, first off, I'm glad you asked me this question. There's nobody who's asked me this question by far. Uh, but this is an answer that I try to give a lot of times. I think I grew up in an ecosystem when I was launching our first hotel in New Delhi. Even if I said I wanted to build the biggest hotel chain in south of Delhi in the next 30 years, everybody around me would look at me and say, "This is the biggest mistake you're making. There is no way that's going to happen." But when I was in the Bay Area, one of like every Thiel fellow I knew would always, by design, think big even before they started their business. I remember my friend Thomas, Alex, everybody constantly thinking about big things. And when I would look at them, I'd feel like, gosh, I think so small. I think just the ability of being able to think big and not think big for the sake of it, but because of the genuine, innocent intention of wanting to make large impact. I think that truly fascinated me, and I had to unlearn myself from being somebody who's very focused on doing small things because the bigger things are reserved for other people, to sort of thinking that if you solve a problem, you could make a difference as big as anybody else. I think that was a fascinating learning for me.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting. Stretching your brain. Speaking of stretching your brain, you are backed by SoftBank's Masa Son, who I do not personally know, but I think he's so adorable. And he also went to my alma mater, Berkeley, in California. I saw him on a show a couple of years ago, and he was sort of recounting his journey. And one of the things that he said is when he was a student at Berkeley, he wanted to make $10,000 a month, but he only had 5 minutes a day. So he asked his roommate, how can I make $10,000 a month with only 5 minutes a day? And his roommate says, of course, in true Berkeley fashion, maybe you should sell drugs, weed. Masa's like, no, I don't want to do that. So Masa gets this idea where every day he sets a timer, and for 5 minutes, and because this is radio and audio, you can't see my cute little action right now. So I encourage you to Google this of Masa. Somebody puts his hand to his head, he sets a timer, and he says, for 5 minutes every day, he visualizes, how could I make $10,000 a month? And lo and behold, of course, he gets an idea, he sells it, and we all know him as, Masa Son of SoftBank. So that being said, he's one of your backers, and I am just dying to know, how did you get connected with him? And what was it like to meet him and convince him to invest in Oyo?
I think I've been very lucky to know Son San, and just each story of his, including this one at Berkeley, has been very inspirational. And personally, I believe that I'm very lucky that over the years, some of the fascinating, fantastic, entrepreneurs, business leaders across the world have chosen to sort of, like, for example, in the Thiel Fellowship, being able to get around the Thiel community and so on was great. The opportunity to partner with Lightspeed and Sequoia earlier. I think SoftBank has been very unique. Sonsan is not just an investor, but also an entrepreneur at the same time. I think I have truly been fascinated by his entrepreneurial skills as much as his investment skills. And whenever I have been lucky enough to spend time or learn from him, I try to spend more time understanding about his learnings and experiences of having spent time with some of the most successful entrepreneurs and his own entrepreneurial journey, and how I could potentially replicate that in our business. But of course, he's extremely busy, so I get limited time. But whenever I do, I try to take all the learnings I can.
Um, a lot of people, we ask, like, how did you meet your first investor? And I get the best stories, like LinkedIn. I just emailed them. So I think it's important for people to realize that, like, the game of finding financing is still person to person. And you kind of have to put yourself out there, which not a lot of people feel comfortable with. I think a lot of people are scared of rejection. So did you feel nervous about, like, just generally feeling nervous about selling or putting yourself out there? Or were you a natural salesman?
No, I think, from my perspective, I have believed that authentic conversations are the 101 of anything I do. So, authentic in the sense sometimes it may make people feel nice, sometimes may not make people very excited, but I think that just works for me. So, from day one, I have tried to just have authentic conversations and build relationships. Substantial amount of rejections back in the day, but I think, frankly, some of those rejections taught me many lessons. But I was never afraid of rejection because I had nothing to lose.
Yeah.
I didn't expect a lot out of, that I'm going to raise capital or something's going to happen. I had no expectations like those. I just wanted to solve a problem for our customers and our small hotel owners. Now, if that did well, I'd be very happy. That's all I was focused on.
Yeah. And I think a lot of that has to do with having, I always say, youthful mindset. In your case, you were actually youthful. And I think that's one of the advantages of just getting started before you're jaded, isn't even the right word, but sometimes it's just where too much experience and overthinking can kind of go against you. I love the story, speaking of investors, of I get the investor Bajul Samaya, is that right? And in 2014, I guess somewhere he had written, or somewhere I read this, I don't know, somewhere on Google, okay, that he was intrigued by your backpack and used to carry around this gigantic backpack. So of course he asked you what's in it. And you say, basically my life's belongings. So we need to discuss what was in this backpack and why you were lugging this around. But I do think it brings up this whole thing of minimalism and being free. And so I want to talk about that about a little bit, because I think that's a really important, not just like a physicality of being free and having a minimalist lifestyle and being an entrepreneur, but also mentally.
Yeah, Bejul, by the way, is also a fellow Guju.
Oh, yeah.
He was an entrepreneur, and then runs now Lightspeed in India, which is a very successful fund. So I met Bejul, by the way, at a Pete's Coffee in the Bay Area for the first time.
Yeah.
And I already thought he was cool because he invited me to meet at Pete's, not at the
Not
other
at
coffee.
Starbucks.
I don't want to name the brands, but I really like Starbucks. It's great.
Yes, oops.
But that said, I think I really like Pechul. I think he was also authentic. He knew, he appreciated where I was coming from. We just, I just, it just really clicked, right? He joined and became a shareholder, a partner of our company when we were, I think, 2 hotels or 3 hotels strong. So we were a very small company then, and we have built this company. Almost, he's become family to me over the years. So the story he tells is probably 1 year into his investment. That is, around that period of time, I actually had no house, which means that neither I, of course, I don't own house, but I also didn't rent a house back then. So I would basically wake up every day, stay at a new Oyo hotel, and then go to another Oyo hotel next day. At that point of time, it actually, frankly, worked for me because it was easier. I knew I could stay very closer to whichever place I finished my work that evening. I didn't have to work on cleaning the room, the laundry. The Oyo hotel got it right. So for me, I think it just worked. So one of these days, Bejul was like, so I used to carry a backpack and a little sort of a laundry bag on the side. And those used to be like my 2 bags I'd carry everywhere. And I didn't have a car as well at that point of time. So Bejul would look at this and be like, "So, Ritesh, why do you carry these two bags with you all the time?" I was like, "Because I take this to an next Oyo hotel." So he was shocked. He was like, "So you don't have an address?" I said, "No, no, my lawyer has found an address, so you can send letters if you have to. But I don't have a real address where I live." So he was extremely surprised, but over time, he has used that as an interesting story from the past. But now I rent a house.
But I think there's something to be said about that. So a lot of people don't know this about me, but in 2000, well, actually, in my life, I have gone through phases like that where I minimize, like sell everything, and everyone thinks I'm crazy. I don't know what happens. It like takes over, and I want to sell everything and be free. And I did that again. I think it was 2012. By the way, this time with a husband and a child. So everyone really thought I was nuts. And I remember my friend asked, "Well, what are you going to do with your sofa? It's so pretty." And I think that's what hit me, is that sometimes we're so overtaken by the stuff and the things that you forget what made us entrepreneurs in the first place, which is really just being free of your mind, right? And minimalistic. And so, yes, over the past 3 years, I've definitely accumulated more stuff. But what I'd like to think is I've kept this idea of being free. So now that you have a place and a car and some things, how do you stay free in your mind and nimble and not kind of get bogged down by that?
From my perspective, I think, like you said, being free and minimalism is extremely critical. Also, because I believe in the new world we live in, people are a lot more focused on experiences than that of goods and products.
Yep.
While, of course, that's what our company does, which is pursuit of better experiences for our customers. But at the same time, I think for me and individually, I feel I have learned the most amount of things from experiences, and probably much lesser by means of the actual products and goods. So, from my perspective, this is absolutely critical from the pursuit of being free.
Well, speaking of experiences, one of the things that I think taking venture money from such branded funds is that it opens up a lot of doors for you, a lot of red carpets. What's been the most amazing experience you've had thus far on this journey?
That's a tough one. That's
Yeah.
a tough one.
You probably had a lot, I can imagine, a lot of cool first time experiences.
Yeah, I think quite a few, and I'm just trying to find. It's hard for me to try and recount any specific one of those. But if I were to think about in the last few years, one of the things that I have found to be the most fascinating thing is that to be able to get access to some of the best conferences in the world, which
Yeah.
frankly today is all under pause, to get access to the best entrepreneurs and listen to them, see the way they're solving problems, so interact with them. I think it's a different form of a TL fellowship. That is being able to see people around yourself who you look at and you feel like, gosh, they sound and look like me. Of course, their pursuits are different, their ways of getting there may be different, but everybody wants to solve a problem. So I think getting to know more entrepreneurs of every kind, scale, and format has been probably one of the most rewarding experiences of being a part of the Thiel Fellowship, of Sequoia Capital family, Lightspeed family, SoftBank family, and so on.
Yeah, and speaking of, for people who are, thinking about this and feel like, "Oh, well, I can't go to those conferences and maybe I don't have access to these types of entrepreneurs and minds." I mean, what books are you reading right now? What podcasts are you listening to? Like, how are you filling your brain up, and what would you recommend for others?
Oh, that's a very interesting question. I like this a lot. So, quite a few. Let me go one after the other. One of the
Yeah.
things that I just got, actually, just got, and I have been wanting to read this, for a long time, has been this Reed Hastings book,
Yeah.
No Rules Rules. Very excited about that. Just getting started with it. Um, got done with I think the biography of Elon Musk recently.
Yes.
Something that I recommend everyone, and I can tell you, I was not told to say this, is Peter Thiel's 0 to 1. I love that book. It is truly the 0 to 1 of how to build great companies. But frankly, beyond this, I have always found documentaries and history being a great teacher. So I try to watch tons and tons of documentaries. A couple of them that I've been very inspired by. One of them is on the History Channel, which is called The Men Who Built America.
Yeah, I
It
love
tells
that.
how the country was civil war striven, and it just tells you you don't have to be wealthy or resourceful to be the best in the world. You got to have your brains, and you got to be innovative, and that can make you the strongest and the most powerful economy in the world, even without having the highest amount of resources. That's what the United States did, and probably few other countries across the world continue to pursue and will probably get there over time. And the second is actually Martin Luther King's Selma. That's a very interesting story I got to see recently, and every speech of his, including my favorite "I Have a Dream," just inspires me. So I think a broad range of choices, I'd say, Alexander.
Have you read Shoe Dogs by Phil Knight, the Nike founder?
Yes, that's on my reading list.
Yeah, you
I'm
have to
inspired
read
by
that.
that.
You
I'm
have to read
inspired
that.
by Nike and just how that business has been built, and most importantly, how they have designed their entire branding with a cause. It's unique, and it's probably a case study for entrepreneurs of our generation, mostly the D2C founders, right? The direct to brand or direct to customer brands. I think it's a case study in that. How do you build a brand where you get good products, but more importantly, you also have great purpose and communicate that effectively.
Yeah, and I think, well, first of all, if people haven't read any of the recommendations that you just stated and watched that, you definitely should, because I've also read some of those and watched that series. It's incredible, and I couldn't agree with you more. But speaking of Nike, one of the things that I think is so interesting about Nike is it's so global. And what is so interesting to me about Oyo is how global it is, and something also that I'm inspired by, and I hope my audience can kind of feel the vibe, is I'm very interested about all of us stretching our minds of just thinking more globally now. It's easier now more than ever with the advent of technology. But how do you create such localized, in some ways, special experiences across 80 countries? I mean, and I get that you have asset partners that help the on the ground experience, but how are you communicating to your partners 80 different types of cultures? Like, how do you handle that and manage that, and how do you think about that?
I think that's an important question, and something that we try to, especially in this new world, right, which is globalized, but at the same time, there is a rise of pride for their own, for the same own nations as well. It's a very unique world we live in, and I think our focus has been being globally local. So being a global brand with shared values, principles, and aspirations, and even value propositions, but at the same time, unique principles and independence of being able to execute and bring those propositions to consumers, merchants, potential employees, etc., in those geographies by themselves. And I think this is something that Nike does really well. If you look at the Chinese ads that Nike brings about, they are so good. Like this, they're fascinating. They bring purpose, and as a young Chinese, you'd actually look at some of them and actually feel very proud about Nike, the brand. You'd feel like they're really bringing all of us together. I think that kind of a sense of strength is something that we believe in as well. That is, if you look at our ads in, for instance, Netherlands, versus if you look at our ads in, for example, Mexico or Brazil, you'd see substantial difference because the proposition is different, the consumer is different, and so on. But the little hotel or owner or the homeowner still gets more dollars than earlier. The customer gets a value for money, predictable, easy to book experience in both places. So those are shared values, but being provided in completely different forms. So the way we do it is by means of lots and lots of data and product features. We are lucky that we have massive troves of data that we receive from our customers, and our customers and our homeowners and hotel owners are kind enough to constantly tell us that, this is what we need. For instance, as COVID hit, we saw that people were traveling a lot more by road trips and wanting to cook food at the holiday home they lived in. And hence, living in a holiday home which was close to a supermarket became extremely critical for our European customers. So we actually started a program wherein for our North European customers, especially the ones in Scandinavia, we would actually give them visibility of information of the nearest supermarket store. And we started partnering supermarket stores to say that we will stock up the first week of supplies for you to come cook your food. And this was a huge hit. Or for instance, in India, we recently saw that we brought sanitized stays globally as a product experience for making sure consumers felt they were comfortable. We partnered Unilever for that. But 70% or 60% of the customers said they trust this, but 30 to 40% said we don't trust this. So we asked them why. And again, all of this is happening through technology, through apps, right? Saying, why do you not trust this? And here are the three options. Would you like us to actually put some labels where we sanitize places? Would you like us to leave a room empty for a day? Or would you like us to sanitize in front of your eyes? Overwhelmingly, 95% customers said we want a choice to sanitize in front of our eyes, and we are happy to pay a couple of dollars for that. So we
Wow.
have actually launched a product called Sanitize in front of your eyes in India, which is actually doing so well. It's been adopted by now around 70% of the user base. So from our perspective, constantly using data as well as technology to constantly get information, work with your local teams and make sure that you take solutions back and continue driving that consistently is something that we are trying to execute consistently. And we are inspired by Netflix. I think Netflix does that
Yeah.
again really well. They get a globalized perspective, but then they know exactly the kind of mindsets that people will have in a geography. Our hope is to try and be as good as them in the markets we serve.
Except for I don't know about your Netflix queue, and I probably shouldn't say this, but I share my account with my brother, and he uses my profile, which I don't understand. You can create your own profile. So our recommendations are all messed up.
Mine
um,
are all histories and documentaries, which are very different from my siblings, I'd imagine.
that's yeah, for sure. Well, speaking of pastimes, like watching Netflix, I heard you were a cricket and well, football, and as we like to call it here, soccer fan. And in 2018, Ernst and Young had this really interesting study where they surveyed all these high-level executives and CEOs, and they found that 90% of the women sampled played sports in high school and college, which I thought was so interesting. And of course, you can imagine the numbers were the same or more in men. And the CEO of Microsoft, Satya Nadella, and of course, former PepsiCo CEO Indra Nooyi are both avid cricketers in their high school and college days and openly speak about their times playing cricket and really what an impact it had on the blueprint, I think, of how they lead. And so I'm just wondering, do you kind of agree with that? And do you look at that idea of a champion's mindset? I mean, because you're an incredible leader. I mean, incredible.
I fully agree that sports is a very critical part of shaping oneself. I used to play a lot of basketball as well as a young kid, and I was so fascinated by it that one day I came to my parents and said, I think I should just become a basketball player full time. This was still when I was in my fifth grade, I think, or sixth grade. That was the first basketball stadium in probably all of South Odisha, right? So I was so lucky, I was so
Wow.
excited and that I wanted to play basketball all the time. But my parents said that don't pay your monthly bills, so you better study. But I still enjoy playing basketball a lot. I believe sports teaches you excellence,
Yeah.
and I'm personally an avid even sports follower. So even though I'm not great news, at least a couple of matches of Giants, for instance, that I went to watch. I went to watch the last year Giants versus Seahawks,
Ooh.
and we lost that
Yeah.
after nine straight wins, I think. So I guess that's not that me watching these games has not been good news in person, but I'm an avid follower. I'm an avid follower of these games because I genuinely believe that a sense of competitive spirit, a sense of team sportsmanship, a sense of respectful competition, a sense of if you lose you're going to come and fight another day. A lot of these things sports teaches you. It's just an extremely valuable attribute to oneself. So when we actually go to recruit in universities, we insist on recruiting the swimming captain, the soccer captain, the cricket
Wow.
captain, because we feel they have dedication, hunger, aspiration to succeed, pursuit for excellence. But when they fail, they're not down and about. They want to come back and fight again. So I think yes, I absolutely, I completely agree that sportsmanship is extremely critical.
You know, the thing about sports is oftentimes you lose. You don't always win. And resilience is a muscle that we have to exercise. And with the pandemic that set in worldwide, lots of people have had to pivot. And I think a lot of people have learned in a micro way, even about themselves, of how they handle changes. And I was so inspired by you, Ritesh, when I read that you had foregone your salary for a year and the changes and how positive you were, even though, I mean, let's be real, there is no way that we can deny that the hospitality industry, especially in the beginning, not knowing, not being able to predict, this isn't even like something you could predict. This is almost like when you do a plan B, aliens will come. Like you don't necessarily think this is possible. So walk me through that time and how you really led your team, because I think a lot of people can learn from that, like where how your mental mindset of resilience and managing a team, whether it's, by the way, everyone, you could use this in your own family, in your own work life, if you run a team. But I think it's an important lesson, and it's one I'm really impressed with how you navigate it.
Sure, I think we're still in the process of navigating,
Yeah.
but we've gotten through probably most part of it now. So let's see how the next few months translate. At least with the vaccines that are being announced every now and then, I hope they find their way to the ground. And our seniors, our first responders, they all deserve this break after a while. And I hope we can treat all of them to a beautiful vacation soon when all of this is behind us. But to begin with, when this really the pandemic hit the world, um, I saw this for the first time impacting our business in China. I thought it was going to be limited to China, but very soon I think it became a global pandemic, and I think the impact was of completely different order. If you look at the history of hospitality, this is unprecedented by far. Probably the only other thing that comes close, actually not as bad as this, was actually 9/11. But nowhere else have you seen hospitality industry occupancies fall so substantially in one time. So it was quite scary. But I think, when I spoke to our team members, our leaders, our partners, I feel that the first time I saw people demonstrating empathy to me.
Yeah.
A lot of our leaders actually told me, Ritesh, nothing to be down about. We got to make some tough decisions, and it's one bad decision over other, and maybe you and I will need to make some tough decisions, and maybe at the end you tell me that, Ritesh, or Mr. X, you're not needed in the organization, but we're going to get through this together, and I'm going to work with you to make this happen. I think just the love and the warmth that I received in the first couple of months, I can't tell how thankful I was at that moment of time. We spoke to people. We tried to come out with the best solutions possible. The first focus was care. All our Oyopreneurs, I actually feel it's a very underappreciated part of our jobs. We actually operated as much as a frontliner as an airline attendant, or we were hosting frontliners across the world. We were the first company in the US which said every frontliner gets a free accommodation to come and stay at our places from day one. I think people really said, we will fix our business, but before that, this is our community duty. We we immediately followed that up by means of making sure that we worked on whatever were the immediate changes that we could make, like that of marketing costs, capex, and so on. At one point of time, it became clear that we had to make further tough decisions, including that of furloughs, which was extremely hard. And I would say that probably one of the hardest decisions in our career, in my career at least. But the way we tried to solve for it was saying that while we do all the basic things like making sure that through the furlough period, we try to give some kind of monetary, some kind of emotional, some kind of financial and other benefits like insurance, school children fees, and things like those. But how do we truly thank these people? There's just no way that we'll be able to thank them. So we actually took 1.5% of our company and gifted it to Oyopreneurs who had taken this step of supporting the organization. And these are all shares that would have that last traded at upwards of $50,000 a piece. We provided it for $0.14 to all these Oyopreneurs. And then I think we listened to our customers, we listened to our partners. Customers said, we want to travel road trips, short distances. We designed our supply that way. Customers said, we want to travel small and medium businesses, essential travelers, truckers. We designed all our business around that. From the fall of 66% from pre-COVID levels in April, now we are at around 85% of our gross margin dollars
Wow.
back.
Wow.
But we are not fully out of the woods yet. We will get there. But coming to my compensation, right? I think I have always said this: if there is anybody who loses compensation in the company, the first one should be me. And this is frankly something that I don't think I'm the only one who's done this. I think one of my inspirations in the hospitality industry is Arnie at Marriott, and I think I saw his video that he made for all the Marriott employees, and I was in tears. It was so emotional, so authentic, and he did the same. I think this is the moral responsibility that I'd have.
Yeah, I mean, what you did was incredible. And I think there are a lot of people who are looking to you to sort of figure out also what they can model and lead and how they can lead their teams. Um, there, you know what? There's no good transition to this. But one of the things that I do, of course, before I talk to any guest is Google stock. I mean, hello. And that's actually how I found out about Oyo in the first place. And when I Google a CEO or another, let's say, female founder, usually the first thing is like, oh, the female CEO and like a husband or boyfriend or something about her marital status. And when I Google a male, it's oftentimes their net worth or something to that effect. But Ritesh, when I Googled you, people are like Ritesh and wife, Ritesh and girlfriend. I'm like, oh, this is kind of weirdly exciting. So I'm going to be fair and equal opportunity, and I'm going to ask you about this. Like, very inquiring single ladies around the world are wondering, Ritesh, are you single?
No, I'm not sure whether those are ladies because it could be anybody searching. but frankly, I think on a lighter note, I come from a Marwadi Indian family who like to marry off all the kids as quickly as possible. But I had a great excuse. My eldest sibling was not married until recently, so I would say deal with him first. But now that he's married, I'm running out of excuses. But at this point of time, I just keep saying I'm married to Oyo. We'll get to it when we'll get to it.
And people ask that because you know why people I think really ask that? Yeah, people are nosy and they want to know and gossip. But I think really at the core of it is that they want to understand how they too can sort of balance their life, like have a vibrant personal life and maybe be a vibrant entrepreneur, which, is difficult. So, how do you sort of, as our sort of last question and thought bubble really is how do you balance both or do you not?
I think the world's changed dramatically there, Alexandra. I think in the previous generation, people would say that to be able to have a big aspiration and to make that successful, you effectively need to assume that everything else around you personally would go wrong. One of our very famous cricketers, Virat Kohli, he's got to be father soon, and he's coming back from Australia for his paternal leave. I think in the new world we live in, professionals work hard. They ensure that they deliver the results that they're expected to. but at the same time are respectful of the family and folks around them. So I think I believe that it is absolutely possible. All you got to do is try.
Yeah, and I think we have, and to your point, I think we have a lot of role models now that are not female led but male led. Like Satya Nadella talks a lot about balancing his life with his family and his kids. You hear that with Bill Gates as well. So I think we have a lot of models around that. So I think that's interesting. But honestly, Ritesh, like your story is so extraordinary, and I just really wanted to sort of thank you for giving us a front row look on how you built your empire, which I know you have even bigger aspirations, which is exciting because I think this story inspires all of us to stretch our mind. And, I always tell my son, what's your biggest dream? And then I say, dream even bigger. And so you're kind of doing that for me. And I hope our audience out there. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me here. And I'm glad you noted, Satya a few times. I think Satya is probably not just one of the, probably the most inspirational business leaders in today's modern operating generation. I think he's incredible, and he's holding our flag up high.
Yeah.
I'm very inspired by him.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. It's a
Thank you
wrap.
so much, Alexandra, for having me here. See you then. Bye bye.